much for being here this evening. Actually, I need to put these on here. I'm going to say a few words before we start the screening, and then we'll move right into Tom's talk. First, I'd like to say how relieved and happy we are to have Tom and Rita back in San Francisco. It's a reminder that life is very precious, and we need to be grateful for every day that we have. And I know that we join Rita and her kids and her grandkids who are here tonight, and feeling extremely lucky to have them here. I wish that we could have seen Michael and Tom in action together. It's been fascinating to watch them riff off one another on Zoom and on the phone these many months leading up to the show. But hopefully this will not be the last opportunity, and it goes without saying that we really enjoyed having Michael here from Vancouver on our opening weekend. Like Tom, he jumped right in, he was painting pedestals, he was making tweets in the space, he was doing live drawing sessions. He was just generally a really inspiring, wonderful person to have around. So I'm hoping he'll be back here soon, maybe with another show. Many of you here have known Tom for decades, but for those who don't, Tom has had an esteemed career as a museum director and curator, retiring from the Cantor Art Center at Stanford in 2012, and before that, he spearheaded the African art collection at the Dion Museum. I'll just say that as a curator, Tom, the artist, is a dream to work with. He has a wicked sense of humor, as you all know, but he is thoroughly unpretentious, extremely generous in every way, and he never takes anything too seriously. Thus, the punny name of the show that he and Michael came up with, 2 squares equals 1. I'll let you ponder that. I've had many people tell me that's not the right mathematical answer. Walking to the gallery, and it's a joke. I know it's a joke. I would also like to just give a shout out to Renee DiCarlo in the drawing room. We have undertaken many projects together, hopefully a new one coming up on $5.99 Valencia this time. Stay tuned for that. But if you're so inclined, we do have a campaign, and we are a nonprofit, so we'd love to have some support to keep going in these empty spaces. I'll say a few words about the film we're about to see. Metal, which just had its US release this year, has been accepted and traveled to film festivals around the world. But we're happy to say this is actually the US Bay Area premiere of this documentary. It hasn't been shown anywhere else in the Bay Area. It's very, very brief. It's only 7 minutes long, but it really packs a punch. In the words of SF State art professor Mark Johnson, who is actually an old friend of Tom's, Metal is a highly unconventional documentary about a surprisingly unconventional native artwork by a resoundingly unconventional hideout artist. Peter Nabokov, who is a professor emeritus at UCLA, calls it, quote, a compact but magnificent preface to the universe of Northwest Coast traditional art. The artist's sophisticated statements and contemporary applications of that art will keep viewers at the edge of their seats, excited what they're going to hear and see next. I will watch this film a dozen times for both its ability to delight, inform, and amaze all at once, and then watch it again. Metal was voted the best fine art documentary at the Alexander Trotter Art Film Festival in Hungary. It won a special festival award at the Arte Nonstop Film Festival in Buenos Aires. Best documentary short at the Dream Machine International Film Festival in LA, and was a finalist for the International Fine Arts Film Festival in Santa Barbara. So with that, I will give you Metal, and thank you so much for being here.
This heron is moving. This heron is dancing. This heron is responding to the moment. Never static, never the same, never predictable, always twisting. Coppers from the hood. Yeah, of course, there's a reference to the automobile hood. But it's also reference to neighborhood. And it just reminds us that we are in one neighborhood. We're not in separate solar systems. We're on the same planet, we're in the same continent, we're in the same city, we're in the same neighborhood. These series started with an invitation by the Museum of Anthropology, MOA, one of the architectural jewels of Canada. The museum approached me and asked me if I would do an intervention. And so they sort of abandoned the stage for a moment. Two stone pillars at the gateway to the institution. One was by the Government of Canada and the other was by the province of British Columbia. Given that the museum is built on the Hokumiam speakers, the Musqueam territory, I wonder where was their voice? Where was the voice of indigeneity? So it seemed to be the deafening silence. My response was to meddle in the museum. As I began to explore the idea of using automobile hoods, I found myself in a junkyard on an island in the middle of what used to be one of the world's most prolific salmon streams, the Fraser River. And in the middle of that junkyard, I found the automobile hoods I was looking for. So my focus was to clean the surface, then leaf it with copper. And I placed these copper-clad hoods on the bones of the building so that they could have a conversation with Canada's claims to the building. My approach is not to overly manage the process, and I imagine myself as an empty brush. It requires me to believe in the potential of the moment. And if I do that, then the potential is undiluted and it's vast. And then it becomes an adventure. The process of creating art becomes an exploration of the unknown. And then it's much more exciting. It's the process of adventure and exploration that happens as we create. It's, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that was possible. And look, there it is. It's discovery. The object is a record of the dance between the artist and the line. And it's as close as the observer can come to an experience is to see the results of the dance. The only way that the observer is going to experience the actual dance is to do it themselves. So the observer needs to meddle on their own. Copper has an honesty to it. Copper is flesh-like. It's accessible. It feels friendly and it feels familiar. The success of high-end design in the contemporary world is because it touches on some of the universal experiences of compression and expansion, of tension, of release. And all people experience this in a very intimate way. I'm trying to capture a moment here, and I'm trying to capture a moment of reflectivity. The lacquer creates that surface that reflects the presence of the observer. When one stands in front of the copper from the hood and looks carefully, you'll see yourself in that piece of artwork. And once you do that, you can't separate yourself from the neighborhood. You are part of the hood. You are the copper in the hood. Coppers are similar to automobiles in that they function as symbols of achievement or status. Coppers are still used today. Copper shields are still manufactured and displayed and gifted and convey respect and notions of incorporeal and tangible value. They still function that way. But the fascination of Western institutions with coppers is rooted in the fascination of the imaginary Indian. This artwork is not confined to a particular place or time. My inspiration is informed by a historical connection to activities deeply rooted in landscape and place, but it is also deeply rooted in this place today, in this time today. This is not a typical time for the species. This is a time for all hands on deck.
Nice to see everybody here, nice to be here, and thanks for your kind words toward me. And Renee, thank you for your help, and Jerry, thank you very much for making your space available and your team to allow us to make this exhibition here. Typically an artist talk, and if I were doing a typical artist talk, I would talk about my work, but because of my calamity in Europe and couldn't travel, Michael had to carry the ball at the opening, and he gave a very nice talk, which I was able to see a recording of. Sorry. Is that better? Yeah. Michael gave a very interesting and engaging presentation, which I saw on video, and they've asked me, Courtney has asked me to talk a little bit more about Michael and my relationship, talk a little bit about some of the work that we did together, which had nothing to do with making art directly, and then how the exhibition came apart. And then I want to touch on a few themes and leave some time for your comments, questions. In the Presidio, there was a conference focusing on Indigenous rights. I've been on the board of a foundation that supported Indigenous rights around the world. And I was in a panel, one of our program officers was giving a very interesting presentation, and after that presentation, this fellow stood up and back and raised his hand or whatever and asked, I thought, a very interesting question. And after that, I went up and spoke to him, and that turned out to be Michael, barefoot in the conference at that point. And we took a liking to each other, got to know each other over time. They came and visited us. I was able to get Michael involved on the board of that same foundation. So over a 10, 12-year period, we had occasions to travel to many parts of the world that are inhabited primarily by Indigenous people, trying to understand what our program dollars were doing, what our program officers were doing in those worlds. And one of the characteristics that Courtney mentioned was wordplay. Michael and I love to banter and play with words. In fact, I sent him an email a couple of days ago because his book, which I just read actually since I've been home, Mischief Making, I said it could be Mischief Making. Michael is not a hereditary chief of the Haida, but he has been, he comes from a lineage on his Haida side of very important Haida authority figures and artists. And a lot of his early training, he lived in I don't know if you know, but off of Vancouver Island, there are islands called Minstance, and Michael was raised on one of these islands. He is a mixed person, as most of us are. So he has ancestry also from Europe. But he grew up principally in a Haida community with mostly Haida values, I would say, at least in his earlier years. So I had spent much of the first year and a half of COVID in our dining room drawing. The results are some of the drawings here, and they're probably equal numbers still at home. And Courtney had responded to them and suggested we do an exhibition project. And when she found this space and was able to work with Jerry and his team to allow us to make a presentation, it was much too large to, you can't imagine looking at 50 of my drawings, and at least I can't imagine doing that. And we've been interested, Courtney had met Michael before, had been interested in getting Michael exposed in the Bay Area. So I called him up and said, hey, this is what's going on, can you do it? And the timeline was short, and he's been extremely busy. He's got 2 major commissions that are going on right now. So he was able to send us these monoprints, which were literally done in 2 days at a workshop. He'd never done printmaking before. And as he told me, he spent these 2 days just slathering inks on glass and then running it through the press. And the results are, some of which are here and some of which I'm sure are in the trash can. And then he was able to secure what he calls flappers. I think that's the British term for the gas cap cover. So these miniature coppers, if you will, are from Lexus and Toyota Tercels that he has treated in the same way as he did the larger hoods and coppers from the hoods, which you've just seen. Now, obviously, Michael likes to play on words, and you got a glimpse of that with coppers in the hood. And what does copper mean to us in English? What does the hood mean? So he charges his work with multiple dimensions and multiple meanings. And of course, using a modern industrial product and then putting it through essentially a modern industrial process of copper coating. But then he draws on each one, and as you saw in the film, he hand draws on each of these. And most of them are derived from Haida design, what one might say is traditional Haida design. But it's not composed the way traditional Haida do that. That's more of what I do or have done in these drawings. This one that's over here, maybe you can see, or this one here, those are more conventional Northwest Coast forms. The black forms are the graphic, if you will, what I call source images for those drawings. So Courtney, when she installed the exhibition, said, well, how are we going to do this? And I intended to be here to work with her. It wasn't, so it was Courtney and Renee, and they worked out what I think are very interesting pairings with work that is really not related to each other. I mean, they don't have any, we didn't do them together, we didn't do them intending to do anything together, but they've come together in this setting. I want to talk about a few themes. There are many, and because I was in academia for a while, I could stand up here and crank your minds for as long as you could tolerate it, or I could tolerate it. So I've selected 2 or 3 things, and the first one, which is very important to Michael, is the notion of hybridity. And most of us are, even though we might think we're European, or we might think we're Native American, or we might think we're something. We are hybrids in most cases, in many cases. And Michael is a hybrid, and he recognizes that, he acknowledges that, he champions that in his life, to be sure. But hybridity can be seen, and I think historically has often been seen, as a negative. It's not pure, it's impure. And I think Michael's job, and I think my job, often has been to try to flip the narrative, to be a kind of trickster, to be a kind of spirit that says, I'm going to say it a different way, I'm going to say it upside down, I'm going to turn it sideways, I'm going to, and whether it's in the work itself, whether it's in the title of the work, or whether it's in the way you conduct yourself in your hood, if you will. So the idea of hybridity is something, I use the term multitudes. It comes from a Browning poem, I Contain Multitudes, is the notion, where do we all come from? Where does our thinking come from? Where do our ideas come from? Where do our visual creations come from? As a maker, Michael's come from his life, from his perspective on his life and his perspective as a modern person in a modern world with traditions that are behind that. Mine come from my experiences significantly in indigenous communities around the world. I've lived and worked in Africa for many, many years. I've had the great privilege of being in indigenous communities in many places of the world. I've been a curator, so I've seen their artistic production. And I've always been struck by some things that I think are very powerful to me. And those are the kinds of things that I have chosen as source images here, at least for those things that are images. The other images are scripts, which I've also been fascinated with, because we all express ourselves differently in language and in different ways with language. And the scripts that I have chosen, most of the words that are expressed are either, like this is Ganesha, that word in Hindi is Ganesha. Ganesha is the elephant deity in Hinduism. The Arabic one that I'm looking at over here behind, I believe that says, it either says love or peace. And so most of the words that I've chosen actually have to do with either deities or the idea of, I'll say it, peace and love, because I think we need a lot more of that in this world. So the hybridity also means that things aren't linear. They're not dualistic. They're not one way or the other. They're a multitude. And you can have a multitude of forces in a work. You can have a multitude of ideas in a work. And each of you will have a multitude of reactions to a work, engagement with a work or disengagement with a work. Michael and I'm speaking for him, I'm not sure I should really in this regard, but I certainly think that the viewer brings as much, if not more, to the table than I do as a maker, at least to my table. Because when somebody will make a comment or remark about something or engage in something, and they might ask a question, and there might be, I'm learning. I'm learning from that. I'm learning how somebody else is perceiving something that I've perceived. Maybe I've made it, but I've also perceived it. And how is that, what does that mean to them? How are they thinking about that? Where does that lead one? Does it lead one anywhere? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The other thing that I've been very engaged in my professional museum career and to some degree in my own studio practice has been the notion of disassembling tradition, particularly in the museum world. Museums, and because I worked in Africa, is traditional African art. And the implication there is for most people, it's fossilized. You know, it's not even from a person, it's made by a tribe. It comes out of this kind of amorphous someplace. And I've always tried to actually engage with makers in my research and field work, identify the makers, applaud the makers, showcase those makers, because each of them is a creative force and has been a creative force in their culture. They are not just some thing that has bubbled to the surface and been collected and put in a vitrine in a museum where they are fossilized. You know, they're embalmed. I mean, museums are institutions that embalm history in many ways. They also generate history in many ways. So the idea of disassembling tradition and this notion of fossilization is also, for me, fits in this idea of hybridity. Another key element is play. I think Courtney used the word wicked sense of humor. I never thought it was wicked. Maybe biting. I read a book, I don't know, half a century ago. I think it was by Norman O. Brown, called Play, or The Importance of Play, or something like that. It always stuck with me. And play can be very serious, but you have to have a spirit that wants to play, I think. And my spirit wants to play. It wants to be provocative. It wants to do wordplay. It wants to tease. It wants to be impish in ways that I suppose they just feed me. But it's the way it's the way I go through my life as much as possible. So the idea of playing and playing with Michael in this process, playing with Courtney and them. I had a boss at the Young Museum when I was curator and deputy director there, named Ian White, who is still alive and still a good friend. And he's also an artist and been a painter of the natural world, primarily landscapes, for many, many, many years, and very, very capable. And when he started to look at my work, he was out here, and he started looking at my work, and he said, "You've taken doodling to a fine art." And I said, "That's great." To me, that was a compliment. I think he meant it as a compliment as well. But I remember back when I was in grade school, my books were filled with doodles. Doodling was a way of thinking. It's a way of processing reality. It's a way of avoiding some other shit that's coming at you as well from the teacher or wherever it was. So that fact of all that very tight, busy drawing is doodling. And for me, it's meditation, because I don't really, when I make these drawings, the form like that, the goat head, well, that's obvious, comes from someplace, and I render that first. And then what I see on the blank page from that, I go somewhere. And I'm not exactly sure how that works, or why that works, or how that works differently one to the other. But something is saying to me, do this. And when I'm doing it, I'm not really conscious. I'm kind of meditating, In fact, this, as I said, was during COVID, and a lot of time I'd be drawing and I might be half an hour into it, and my back was getting stiff or something. But I'd then be thinking about it, my mind would drift off, and I'd say, I haven't called that friend of mine, find out how they work. I'd put it down, I'd pick up the phone, and I'd call. I just let that kind of weave into my process during those 2 or 3 years. Obviously, things have changed since then, and as the work has changed. Wordplay, what was this film called? Anybody remember the title of the film?
Metal.
Is it, how do you spell that?
M-E-D-D-L.
How about M-E-T-A-L? To
I
me,
heard it was about.
yeah, to me that is one of the kind of, just, as I'm engaged more and more with Michael, every one of these things is a riff on something else.
Yeah.
It just keeps, it keeps evolving, it keeps being played with. Let me last talk about appropriation, and one of the folks I was talking with earlier kind of brought up the politics of appropriation. And there's a huge amount of politics around this idea. And I recognize those. As I mentioned, I was in academia, I was working in African art, and the politics surrounded all of that and continue to surround all of that. I don't feel in any way defensive about the work that I do, the borrowing that I do, the appropriation, if you will, that I do, because I have such a deep respect for those cultures, and these all come from cultures that I know and haven't been engaged with in my life. So it's not that I've just reached into the bin and pulled something out. The artistic side of the world, history, artists have always appropriated. How do we learn? We see things. We take from things that we've seen. They may be other artists, they may be from the natural world, they may be from the street, wherever. But we as humans, I think that's the only way we learn, is we bring into ourselves what we see and feel and engage with from the outside. So for me, appropriation, and that's why I call these things appropriation, because I actually want to, at some level, provoke that dialogue, provoke that question. Is, am I, as an old white guy, able to take a Haida design or Chinese calligraphy or Arabic calligraphy? Is that okay, or is that not okay? And who's to say at the end of the day? I mean, for me, it's okay. But somebody else might think it's not okay. And that's their right, but I'd also be interested in having a discussion with the person who feels it's not okay. Because I'll learn something from that, and maybe they'll learn something in return. Michael is probably best identified, at least self-identified, as making Haida manga. And manga, there's a drawing over here, it's a manga drawing of mine, had no relation to Michael. It had relation to manga because one of my sons is very into graphic novels and looks at that material a lot. I've seen a lot of it around the house. But manga means precisely, Michael translates it as, somewhere in here, I wrote it down. Where did I write that down? Because it's a good translation. Come on, oh yeah, imagery without restrictions. And for Michael and for me, we work in many, many media. We're not, somebody asks, are you a painter? No, I'm not a painter. I paint. Sometimes I paint houses, sometimes I paint. Yesterday I was painting a new railing we put on our front stairs. Yeah, I'm a painter. I'm a drawer, I make sculpture. The sculptures here are all from a family property we have in Southern California that is a farm, raises lemons and avocados. And it's all detritus that I get the foreman to save for me, and then I haul it up here and make things with it. Another form of appropriation maybe, or expropriation, not quite sure. So let me close with that, and thank you all for being here, and ask if there's comments or questions, because I'd be delighted to have some if there are any. And if you're,
Are the gas caps from Toyota hybrids?
they aren't. But you're sharp.
Just wondering.
And that will be passed on. That will be passed on tonight. Yeah. In fact, we have a Toyota hybrid parked outside. Maybe I'll put one of these on there. Send them one of these. Any thoughts? Or, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
A little different, you didn't mention it, but I'm curious about the scissors, the nails.
About the work I did with
Yeah,
nails?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you saw them a few years ago? Yeah.
I've seen only online.
Okay. So, I doodled in the margins of the school books and every other book. I also pounded nails from a very young age because my dad had a workshop and I built stuff. A difference, I've talked a lot about the parallels between Michael and I. A significant difference is I am much more of a hands person than Michael is. A lot of the fabrication, Michael can draw very beautifully, but he doesn't really build things. You know, he has fabricators and others do that work. I build everything, all these sculptures I build. I don't, so I've always worked with tools, I've always worked in workshops, and the nails were they kind of came from my trying to decolonize myself when I retired from Africa and the museum world. And one of the things in African art that's very famous and very important are nail fetishes from the Congo people of Central Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo. And these are power figures, and there's a whole set of rituals and life around them. And that was in my head, my history with nails was in my head, and I just started working with nails. I have a workshop full of nails. So I just started messing around with nails. And some of the early ones were actually making nail fetishes. I bought Ken dolls online, Ken and Barbie. I just bought Ken. And then I would stand at the stove and heat nails up and push them into these things. And that just grew. And then I started to research nails. And there's an amazing history and spread of what nails mean in the world. And I got kind of fascinated by something called triclavinism, because most crucifixes are like this. Legs crossed, one nail, one nail, one nail. Well, of course, the Romans didn't do that. It wouldn't work physically. You'd just rip out off a cross if they tried to do that. They had them on blocks. And you'll see, if you do research, as I did, you'll find that there are many depictions with two legs separated with four nails in them. And a pope back in the 12th or 13th century decided he was looking for symmetry in the church, and you had the Holy Trinity, so now you get three nails. So that kind of research, the word play, he nailed it, put another nail in the coffin, you can go on and on and on and on. And those drifts, if you will, mental drifts, just keep feeding one to the next, one to the next. And when they evoke an image of some kind or evoke something to make from that, then I try. It's a good part. Once you've gone there, then it's an execution. What am I trying to do here, and how do I do that? And that's what actually keeps me going, because I'm learning to do new kinds of things. Like I have not welded much before, and I have a guy helping me because he's got the welder. I don't weld. I don't have a welder at home. But, you know, I'm learning how to do that. And each one of those is yet another kind of exploration for me. And the nails, you know, I still work with nails, some, not as much, but I painted nails. I did very tight paintings of nails and drawings of nails. And I think in that former show, there was a scroll I did. It was like a pencil drawing of about a 10-foot long nail. And, you know, I just, it's kind of where your mind goes, I guess. One thing leads to another sometimes. Yeah.
What area in Africa was your experience?
Whoa. Well, I lived in Liberia for 2 years in Peace Corps in the late 60s. And then I traveled extensively in West Africa, and then I began a lot of work in Niger among Tuareg people. And I did that for up until 2007, 2008. Still stay in touch with those people, but I haven't been there since maybe that time or 2010, something like that. But I've, you know, it's easier for me to say I haven't been in Sudan or South Sudan, I haven't been in Eritrea, I haven't been in Mozambique or Madagascar. And I think everywhere else I've been. Not for protracted periods like Niger, Mali, and Liberia, but a lot. Yeah.
One of the concepts mentioned in the documentary was like expansion and contraction, and
Yeah.
you can kind of see that with your use of space in some of your
Yeah.
drawings. You
Yeah.
know, I'm kind of curious from like a meditative perspective, what was, I guess, going on with your use of space, like mentally? Was it reflecting anything of your state of mind?
I don't talk to my therapist. I don't really know how to answer that. Because you're sitting there at a table, I am drawing. I'm this proximate. It's not like painting where sometimes you'll get up and stand back and say, I need to do something here, you know, either more forcefully or a different color or, you know, this or that. Occasionally I'd pull back from something a little bit. I'd stand up anyway to go get a coffee in the kitchen next room. And I'd say, man, it should be a little dark in here someplace. So then I'd just get a little tighter in some area. It wasn't a specific area. It didn't say, make me darker right here. It said, I need some darkness in this thing. And so, but a lot of these things, they just flow into themselves. And sometimes I think it's just a pen drawing. You know, and I'm just kind of holding the pen. You know, I'm not super conscious of that. But sometimes these little things will start to migrate, and I'm kind of aware of that. I'm kind of saying, well, this is leading out here, and you know, half the page is still blank, and so it's going out here, and then you know, something else. So it's not controlled. I can tell you that. But clearly, it's not out of control either, because it's in a confined setting, confined piece of paper. Actually, the guy who bought this, he said, I really don't like that busier stuff in the middle. He liked this one here, this kind of arching stuff on the outside. And I said, well, yeah, sometimes I have like a French curve on the table here, and I'll just pick it up. And that's what those lines are on the upper right. There's just I don't know why those are there. I have no idea why those are there. Do they work? I don't know. I thought they worked, so I left them there. You know, I don't know. I don't mean to be doofusy about it, but there's kind of no other way I can explain it. Yeah.
Dealing with that work, Ganesha is the god for removing obstacles.
Right.
How do you integrate that into the overall scheme of looking at the work? You have a swastika there too. Both very powerful symbols in their own cultures.
Right. I don't. I explicitly don't. What I did with these drawings is I chose a source image. I didn't want to draw a Ganesha elephant. You know? And I love these scripts, so I use the scripts, but I am not trying to make a relationship. I'm not trying to make a relationship between, this is known as Baphomet,
Yeah, right.
and my youngest son is how do I say this? He's not exactly a practitioner, but he kind of is touched by the satanic temple. I think that's what it's called. And this is their symbol. So I've seen this symbol with him, you know, and I say, okay, let me use that. But I'm not trying to do anything with that more than let it inspire what goes on around it in the other drawing that I do.
But you can't avoid it either.
You can't avoid it. I can. I do, on purpose avoid it. Because I'm not trying to tell a story or make a representation. I'm trying to make a drawing, and I draw all the time, so there are many other drawings that don't have these kind of things in it. They're just, you know, they'd be like, you know, taking this section and blowing it up to the size of the sheet. But this was, as I said, this was during COVID, and this is probably the only work that I've done that I've ever put a label on appropriation drawings. Many other things, I just are drawings.
Yeah, I saw you during COVID doing these things. You didn't have the big
Right.
symbols on them.
Right.
I'm wondering whether you started with some symbols and made the drawing, or which way, or where?
No, these came later.
Yeah.
These came later.
So when you started this drawing, for instance,
Right.
what did you start with?
Oh, every time it was with the source image. Every time. So where I placed it was not arbitrary, but somewhat arbitrary. And I decide differently. Some are, there's actually one on this back wall here. Somebody looked at it, it's a Haida or Tlingit design. Well, it should be this way. It should be horizontal. But I didn't want it to be horizontal because I didn't want it to be so literal. So I turned
And
it
then
vertical.
you filled in all of the.
Then I filled in. Or you know, this one back here with the Arabic script, I didn't fill in. You know, sometimes enough is enough somehow. You know, you just say it doesn't need more, it doesn't want more, so you stop. Time for a break. One more question.
I know you mentioned that these pieces were just as much about the viewer's experience, kind of bringing it into the piece as it is, like, you as the artist creating the piece. I'm not sure how much these have been displayed elsewhere, but I'm curious for like reactions from the audience so far, especially for people like from these cultures. Have you heard a lot?
Unfortunately, because I was laid up and couldn't get back here, this is the third time I've been in this space, so I can't answer your question. I can say one thing, which ties back to Michael. Because in Michael's talk that he gave here a month or so ago, which I saw the video, he did not talk about my drawings because he wasn't asked to. I mean, so there's no knock on Michael there. But I was curious from him because Michael is very political. I wrote him and I said, so what do you think about the appropriation drawings? And you know, I'm not looking for art critique of the drawing, but the idea of appropriation. He wrote me a very thoughtful 2-page email back, which interested me because in his experience, if one of the Haida source images, he felt if that were shown, let's say in Vancouver, not in the Bay Area, but in Vancouver, you might get a very different kind of reaction because the Haida are in that region. So you might have a different kind of reaction than you might hear. There was some conversation because Michael's Native American. Or should we involve the local Native Americans here? Michael didn't want to do that. Michael is making art. He's not trying to. Michael did politics for 25 years, stopping logging in Haida Gwaii. I mean, he was on the front lines. He was arrested several times, blocking logging industries from clear cutting those beautiful old cedars. And 15, 20 years ago, Michael said, okay, I'm just going to be an artist now. I've done my duty, if you will, but obviously as artists informed, as you see with this, just the politics that resonate through that whole film, and much of his work is that way. So that's the only reaction I've had. If you have one, I'd love to hear it.
Oh, gosh. I'm still curious from Michael's perspective. Did he have like a verdict, on?
No, it was, he, because we're so close as friends and known each other so long, he said, I know you and I know why you're doing these things, and I trust you. But he also will talk about the violence of appropriation, the violence of colonialism, very strongly, as will I. And his culture has gone through an enormously violent conquest, almost wiped out. And fortunately, they're resilient, and they've been much more resilient, and they're led by a lot of artists, actually. Michael being one of them. So, basta? Time for some wine? Oh, wait a minute. One more thing. This was a gift to Michael. Because this guy you'll find over there, and you'll find in 2 or 3 of his other things, so I had to appropriate Michael.
So I'm interested in your doing art.
About that